Good evening, I'm Pinky Webb. Tonight we ask the questions, we tackle the issues, we clarify matters, and we get on point. Several petitions filed before the Supreme Court questioning this year's budget. A coalition raises the constitutional provision requiring the biggest allocation to education. It also asserts the importance of funding for PhilHealth and opposes the intervention of lawmakers in the implementation of financial aid to their constituents. Let's get on point with UP School of Economics Associate Professor Cielo Magno. Professor Magno, finally, I have you here. Maraming salamat sa iyong oras.
Thank you for inviting me, Pinky.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that we probably invited Professor Cielo a number of times, but she has her own YouTube channel also. No? Your own, is it a YouTube channel or podcast?
YouTube channel, yes.
Okay. So finally, nakuha natin siya. Perfect also, there's two issues that need to be discussed. One is, of course, this. The questioning the 2025 budget before the Supreme Court. The group of Professor Cielo is the third group to question this before the SC. There's a fourth one that questioned this also yesterday. It's the group of the Teachers Dignity Coalition and the Teachers Dignity Coalition and Freedom from Debt Coalition. So, with regards to your group, together with former Senior Associate Justice Carpio, former Associate Justice Conchita Carpio Morales, and also Ombudsman and others. There are three issues that you're questioning. Let's tackle it one by one just to better understand it. Let's start with this. It talks about the Education Department, which under the Constitution, Article 14, Section 5 of the Constitution basically says, and we're going to put that up on the screen, is that the education sector should have the biggest budgetary allocation. This was debated way back nung nalaman na medyo mas mataas ang DPWH compared dito sa education sector. What is the problem now?
You know, the reason we are petitioning is because if you look at the DepEd budget, the budget of DPWH is still bigger than the Department of Education budget. And the justification of the administration with respect to the budget for education is that we have to look at it as a sector, which is okay. Because for me, for example, the budget of a technical education is part of a continuing education which contributes to the growth of a basic education in the country. But if you look at the breakdown of how the government is justifying this, they're including the budget of the Philippine Military Academy, Philippine National Police Academy, Local Government Academy, and then the Philippine Public Safety Academy. Madalas nga ako nagjo-joke na the way the government is justifying this is maybe they opened a PDF document and they search college and an academy, right? And then included everything. Yes, let's include everything. But it's kind of ridiculous to be including this. Yes, these are academic institutions also because you have graduates from the PMA. But if you look at the main objective of the PMA, it's about national defense, national security, public safety, these institutions. And when you talk about the education sector, and if you look at the basic discussion when the Constitution was formed, we're talking of access to basic education that will contribute to national development. So for me, it's ridiculous and a bit of a stretch to be including these items in the budget sector.
Let's bring that up again on screen. Article 14, Section 5 of the Constitution. The state shall assign the highest budgetary priority to education. So education, and ensure that teaching will attract and retain its rightful share of the best available talents through adequate remuneration and other means of job satisfaction and fulfillment. So dito ho kasi, Professor Magno was saying that sa education sector, nasama yung PNPA at nasama din yung PMA.
And the Local Government Academy.
And the local government. Wala bang education doon sa PMA, sa PNPA, etc.?
There are education activities in these institutions. But if you look at the reason why they're providing education there, the main objective is really to strengthen our national defense, public safety and security. Local Government Academy is actually for training of local government officials. When you talk of basic education, the reason why we want to fund basic education is about increasing opportunities of people. It's about development. It's about getting people out of poverty. So when you evaluate, you can even look at the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're talking about basic education and continuing education because it's about improving human capital and social development. And if you look at the main objective, this is the first thing that I did when I saw that discussion of DBM. I Googled what is the mission of PMA, and it's national security. So it's kind of ridiculous to bunch them all together.
But what if they say it's continuing education?
Continuing,
I'll say that because one of the statements made by the Executive Secretary, Lucas Bersamin, was that he says that not in these exact words. The language of the Constitution is not specific. That's why we put that back on the screen a little earlier. It is not specific, so we need to have a broader understanding of education. And he says that responsibility of education, I guess, has shifted to other areas.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you're talking of development, there are other areas, of course, of education. But when you talk about basic development and basic rights to education, you go back to the core principles of why we provide education. And even in the literature, even in economics, when you talk about access to education and improving human capital, you focus to making sure that we have sufficient, sustainable access to basic education. Because before you can even talk about continuing education, if your people do not have access to good basic education, then what's the point of continuing education, right?
It starts there.
Yeah, look at UP. We are providing free tertiary education, but look at who's availing free tertiary education. These are the middle class, upper class, benefiting from free education, right? Because if you don't really prioritize and focus on basic education, then you have a problem. But on the point of Executive Secretary Bersamin, I think this is the heart of the whole case. We want to go to the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court can consider the whole discussion of the framers of the Constitution. When they put this provision in the Constitution,
right,
what do they really mean?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think it's high time for the Supreme Court to actually define when what it means when the Constitution say prioritize education as a sector.
And with what is included in the education sector.
Yes.
A quick follow-up on that. When you do not have a problem with, obviously, I'm sure the CHED or the TESDA, which is part of the education sector.
Yeah.
What you were questioning were the other areas or institutions that were brought in. Here's one question. Did you look into the previous budgets, and did they include the budgets of the PNPA or the PMA as part of the education sector?
Actually, historically, when we talk about the education sector, based on documentation and presentation of previous administration, we only compare the budget of the Department of Education and the Department of DPWH. But remember before, we only have one DepEd, diba? And that includes the tertiary, TESDA, before we chop them into 3 different institutions. So for me, I don't think it's an issue if we include CHED and TESDA in that budget. But if you include, I'm not saying PMA is not important, PNPA is not important.
But
in
not
fact, we should be allocating budget for public safety and national security. But let's not kid ourselves by putting them under education. I think they're better classified as items for national security.
So it's a question for you and your group, because those PNPA, PMA, etc. were added to the education budget total. Yeah. Hence, it made that budget higher than that of the DPWH, which I think in the end amounted to 1.056 trillion for the education sector and 1 trillion for the DPWH.
Yeah, but then the funny thing is they also reduced the budget under DPWH by saying that the convergence items, the small farm-to-market roads,
and flood control projects were vetoed by the president.
Yeah,
I believe.
and they said these are not part of really DPWH because these are convergence projects under convergence projects of different agencies being implemented by DPWH. Again, these are still infrastructure projects, right? So this is the first time I've encountered the government really trying to find ways to massage the budget to make education bigger than the infrastructure projects of government.
You mean to make education appear?
Yes, appear to be bigger. But the thing also is that this is part of the bigger conversation in terms of how we are finalizing our budget. Remember, because this stems from the fact that a lot of realignment of the items happened during the bicameral conference committee, where the members of the BICAM increased the budget of DPWH by 200 billion plus pesos, right? And then a lot
They
of
took out 12 billion from the Education Department.
yes.
Yeah.
And then
Of
even from
Secretary
AFP
Sani
modernization,
Angara.
right? And even 4Ps, right?
4Ps natanggalan din.
Yeah. So these are important conversations because the budget reflects it's essentially our program of action for the year. What does the government really prioritizing when we talk about the budget?
And where does the money really go?
Going.
And how is it being utilized?
Right.
That's the first one. So
Yeah.
with this being questioned before the Supreme Court, we can hope that there are parameters that will be
Yeah.
set and define what is really supposed to be part of Article 14,
Yes.
Section 5 of the
So
Constitution.
hopefully, in the next budget cycle, there will be clear guidance for
Right.
our legislators in terms of how much money, which sector, how do we define education as a sector.
And in the hope that the Supreme Court will have a decision on this
Yes.
before they pass the next budget for
Yes,
2026,
hopefully.
which will be sometime in December, maybe,
Yeah.
of this year. Let's go to the second point. The second point, widely also discussed, the zero
Yeah.
subsidy to PhilHealth, which you say violates the syntax law.
Yes.
For the universal healthcare law. Why?
Yes.
Because the syntax law, a certain percentage of that, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken, 80?
50% of the 80% of sin taxes we collect from sugary
Tobacco.
beverage and tobacco are specifically earmarked for PhilHealth.
Can you
That's
repeat that
subsidy.
again? 50% of that.
50% of the 80%.
80%.
So essentially, that's 40%. I don't know why they framed it that way, but
So first we go to the 80%. Kung anong kinikita, anong revenue for tobacco and sweetened beverages?
Yes.
What is the
Half of
total
that.
there? And then half of that,
Yes.
50% of that. Okay.
yes. So that's earmarked specifically for subsidy of PhilHealth. And that's very interesting because the whole idea behind PhilHealth under the Universal Healthcare Act is that everyone is now member of PhilHealth, which is actually good. And it recognizes the idea that, for example, seniors, they're not working, they're not able to contribute premium anymore. So they're automatically covered. But to make sure that it becomes a sustainable program, they earmark the funding from sin taxes. No? But aside from the seniors, that also includes indigent Filipinos, those who are not able to pay for their hospitalization and for the premium. And that's because we want to avoid the catastrophic healthcare expense situation. Diba? So that's the whole idea. With PhilHealth, we are all covered. We have a social insurance. And then, all of a sudden, the government
I think
decided...
you also need to add the PWDs. I think
Yes,
they're part of
PWD,
that.
that's also part.
So they're
Actually,
called the
SK
indirect-
officials.
They're indirect, these are the
Contributors.
indirect contributors.
Yes,
and then
yes.
for people like us, we are the direct contributors. So
Contributors,
this
yeah.
money is supposed to fund the indirect kababayans natin,
Correct.
which are the seniors, the
Oo.
indigents, people with disabilities.
Yeah, because that's the idea of insurance, right? Everyone pays a premium, we pool the fund, and then if someone gets sick, we get the money from the pool of money to finance, diba? So the idea is that it's government's responsibility to pay for all these individuals, indirect contributors. And that's why we are so disappointed when the government all of a sudden decided to provide zero subsidy for this sector, because they said there's excess money, the regular contributors will pay anyway, so government has money.
Which I may add is very unfair for the
Exactly.
direct contributors too. I mean, if there is money, why did you just choose, oh, we're not going to give money for the indirect? You could have also saved those people who
Right.
who are the direct
I actually want to
contributors.
challenge the government, because if they're saying that we're not paying for the indirect contributors
So-
because PhilHealth has money, then
Why
they
are
should
we
also
paying?
suspend our premium, right? Why are we subsidizing them? Let's also spend the contribution of everyone to PhilHealth if they have money, so that we can all get relief. Why is the government the only one getting relief from
Bakit
contributing
sila?
to
Hindi
Correct.
ba? Even if they say
Correct.
hindi naman sila dahil ang makikinabang ay yung mga indirect. But then, yun yung kanilang responsibilidad. That was the
Right.
government's responsibility to the indirect sector.
And I feel like there is a social contract between us and the government. We pay our contribution. You paid the
Yeah.
premium of those who cannot pay. So why are you now passing the burden on us, contributors?
Kayo na lang magbayad kami, hindi na kami. I've actually raised that question a
Diba?
number of times.
What did they say?
Oo nga, no? Minsan may ganon. Kasi I couldn't also understand.
Right.
If there is enough or excess or surplus money for PhilHealth, bakit yung contribution ng gobyerno ang sinabing, o sige, free pass muna kayo this year. Bakit hindi
Why
tayo?
can't we get that?
Or maybe they could have lowered whatever it is we're paying in terms of
Exactly.
percentage, and then they pay the indirect and we pay, pero on a much lower amount.
And
that
is
would have been fair.
And that's what's in the law. If there's excess money, you cannot decide not to pay. You have to refund us or expand the coverage. So if you just ignore government and allow them to just do all these things without raising all these issues, I think we'll never achieve a universal healthcare program.
But more important than that, of course, from our point of view, that why are we paying? Is that it's supposed to violate the law, especially on the sin tax,
Right.
Because that money is supposed to directly go to PhilHealth to fund the universal healthcare law.
Yes. And so the constitutional issue there is because there are previous decisions of the Supreme Court already saying that a general law like the General Appropriations Act cannot amend specific laws. And it's very clear under the Universal Healthcare Act and sin tax law that these are earmarked for funding of PhilHealth. So if the congressmen and senators all of a sudden decided not to give that subsidy, they essentially amended these two laws. And that's unconstitutional.
On their own.
Yes.
Unilaterally.
Yeah. That's one. And then the second thing is, if you're following the deliberation in the Supreme Court, I always attend that kasi as petitioner. And it's so funny how the Department of Finance computed, this is not related to this case anymore.
This is different.
The previous
this is the transfer. This is the transfer.
Yes,
There's another
yes.
case that's having oral arguments right now.
Yes.
The transfer of almost 60 billion pesos of PhilHealth funds to the National Treasury,
Right.
which was questioned again by
our group,
by
right?
your group. So this is having the oral arguments right now. And you were saying that.
Yeah, so we had a TRO, they were only able to get 60 billion. And then if you look at the way the Department of Finance computed that 90 billion, they said, the government contributed this subsidy, this much subsidy, and this is how much the sector spent only. So there's this excess money that they did not spend.
How do they know that?
They computed it now based on PhilHealth, which is kind of ironic because it goes against the basic concept of insurance. Kasi nga, when you pay your insurance,
You pool the resources and
Yes.
money,
And
combine it all.
And that pooled money is used to finance everyone, right? So when you pay the premium of the indigent, you don't make a distinction that this is the premium of those who are regularly paying and these are the premium of the indigent. When you pay the premium,
Pinagsama-sama mo na lahat yan eh.
Exactly.
Oo.
You
Tapos
cannot
binayaran mo kung
differentiate.
sino yung mga nangangailangan,
Right.
indigent man o hindi.
Diba?
Yeah.
Kasi in the private sector, when we pay our premium, we don't say, I did not spend my, can I get a refund?
You cannot. Yeah. It's
So
as good as expired. Kaya nga sinasabi na the PhilHealth money should be used, should be maximized, should be utilized.
There's no debate on that, right? But that's what they should be doing. So it's, what worries me is that these are the finance people, the head of our government finance team who are making this justification. Are you telling me they don't know the basic of insurance?
But I guess the question is, there must be, not to their defense, but there must be numbers they're looking at to be able to make that case. But I'd like to try to understand it better.
But they looked at how much subsidy they transferred and how much the sector spent. And that's it. There's a difference. They presented it in a
But
table.
why is it one way? They looked at how much subsidy what about the subsidy we also gave, di ba?
Right.
I now, the percentage escapes me, but in that pie, for example, this is not a fact. Let's say a certain percentage, let's just say 40% is indirect and 60% is direct. So, at the end of the day, really, pinagsasama mo yung dalawang yan. Hindi mo siya, walang demarcation line yan eh. All right. There's a third argument by the group, and we're going to discuss that, but we're going to take a very short break first with UP School of Economics Associate Professor Cielo Magno. Stay tuned. This is On Point.
Naniniwala ang PCSO na nasa ating mga kamay ang pag-asang umasenso. Nasa kamay ang pagbibigay ng malasakit. Nasa kamay ang pagbibigay ng ginhawa. Kaya ang mga kamay ng PCSO tuloy-tuloy na tumutulong sa oras man ng kalamidad o pangangailangan. Yan ang panata sa bayan. Ligaya sa mamamayan. Dahil ang PCSO di umuurong sa pagtulong.
Magandang gabi. Ako po si Pinky Webb.
At ako naman si Corina Sanchez Rojas.
Kombinasyong Corina Sanchez Rojas at Pinky Webb. Dalawang mamamahayag na subok sa tapang at talino.
Simulcast tayo sa DWAR, Abante Radyo at 94.7 Mellow BFM.
Mapapanood din tayo sa Abante Teletabloid sa SkyCable. Sa bawat issue may anggulo at ang balita may agenda.
Yeah. Only 60.
Welcome back. You're watching On Point, still with us, UP School of Economics Associate Professor Cielo Magno. They have a third argument here, also very controversial. It is the case of Akap.
Yes.
Okay, why is this a problem?
That's one of our favorite items in the budget. It wasn't, you know how the Akap program started. It was an insertion by Congress in the bicameral committee meeting. It's very interesting.
In 2024, no?
Yes.
The first time this came to life was in 2024.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at the whole budget process, if you respect the budget process, it starts from the conceptualization of items kasi. These programs, because funded by millions of pesos, have to be well thought. Now, this program, with how much is it? 26 billion pesos earmarked for Akap was inserted in 2024 without any guidance notes on how to implement them. And then we see the implementation now in 2025, and we see congressmen very actively participating on how this money is being distributed. And you know what, when I started vlogging about this, people will send me pictures of the documents they sign, and the documents would say earmarked and charged to the fund of specific congressman. Diba? And so our argument is that based on the decisions of the Supreme Court before regarding the pork barrel, there's a separation of power. Congress, the power is to legislate, produce laws. They do not have any role in terms of implementation. So their role in Akap is a direct violation of that decision, of that provision in the Constitution that says Congress should not have any role in the implementations of projects, and that's why pork barrel, as we knew it, was declared unconstitutional. So the same argument, we're using the same argument here with respect to Akap.
Akap is ayuda para sa kapos ang kita program. I believe that's what it's called. So ito po yung, which actually, to be quite honest, in the beginning was a little confusing for me, because way back when I read about it, because you are right, it was inserted in 2024 during the BICAM. I mean, it came to life only last year, and then now it's part of the budget. But then from what I recall, in interviews in the past, it was supposed to be para dun sa mga minimum wage earners na kulang ang kita, which ultimately is factual. Kulang talagang kita ng minimum wage earners. So I will say it in the beginning, I thought it was a good idea because it helps people who are minimum wage earners and above. Parang yun yun siya tayong konting nasa taas. But now it's a different description. It's to those who are not above the statutory minimum wage. So I couldn't quite get it. So my understanding is if you are a little above the, hindi ka nakasali.
It's actually very confusing, and that's why we start questioning how they're really targeting the recipients of the Akap program.
Number one, is there, meron bang may
targeting mechanism,
may
right?
targeting mechanism? May data ba sila? Apparently, there's none.
There's no
coming
database.
From the
Exactly,
DSWD.
exactly. And then the question that we begin to raise is that when you have a social protection program, number one is you have to target the population. And the second one is that, of course, you want people to exit from that situation. So for example, in the 4-piece program, we're targeting the poorest of the poor, but there's a component in terms of empowerment, incentives to make sure that the parents send their children to school, you upgrade their skills, because you want the social protection program to be an incentive so that they get out of poverty. But this Akap program, they also say it's an assistance because of problems of inflation.
Right.
Diba? Parang, does it really address the inflation problem? So if you really dissect what causes inflation, isn't giving people more money to spend, wouldn't that also contribute to inflation? I don't think it's a sustainable approach in terms of really addressing inflation. We can have another episode on inflation. But no, just to focus again on Akap, it's not a very well thought program. There's no clear, design on what really the purpose was of the program.
What is the target number of recipients? Even that, I don't think that's very clear. Last I looked. And can really ask for the assistance. Because in previous hearings, it appeared from the DSWD side that merong endorsement ang congressman, for example, dito.
Yeah.
So then you question, bakit pa kailangan ng endorsement, di ba?
Yeah.
So for you, questionable itong Akap.
Yes. Because it's obviously being used to promote political patronage. Right? You get the assistance only after an endorsement of a politician. It doesn't even contribute to anything sustainable. And you know what worries me is that, okay, you have the Akap program, but then you cut the budget for 4Ps, which is a more stable, more institutionalized
And that wasn't
program.
talked about much, ha? Yung pagtanggal ng budget, a part of the budget of the
Budget cut
4Ps,
for 4Ps. And now a lot of people are actually directly messaging me also na, ma'am, our assistance for 4Ps, it was reduced, ganito, ganyan.
And the question here also is, will this be exempted or will it be part of the election ban?
No, the COMELEC exempted the distribution of Akap
Okay.
in that ban, diba? So,
Yeah.
okay. You can see the whole, and that's what frustrates me about this budget. So that's why, aside from filing cases in the Supreme Court, I keep on questioning it and discussing it because, as I said, it's a blueprint. It reflects an agenda of a government in terms of what kind of development, what kind of programs are we prioritizing. If you look at the budget, more allocation for Akap, reducing PhilHealth, where 4Ps. While in 4Ps, you already have an institutionalized mechanism to incentivize people, to empower them to get out of poverty. And then all of a sudden, you have this new program, Akap, which is not well thought, but well funded, with congressmen intervening in terms of implementation. Another kind of assistance is the medical assistance for MAIP.
MAIP. Medical assistance for indigent.
And financially something
Parang challenged, blah, blah, blah.
patients, ganyan.
Actually, minsan nakakalito kasi may MAIP, AIC, Akap, Tupad. Ayun.
Ang dami na, diba? And
Pero iba-iba naman, I think, yung Tupad.
supposedly. So dapat, if you're talking of social protection, dapat well-connected sila eh. Kapag nag-exit
Dapat
ka ng
walang
4Ps,
overlapping.
and then, but you still need something, okay, you go here. If you're a working class, in other countries, they don't give you dole out na parang, okay, you need more money here, more money. What are the assistance that they give you if you're a working class? Healthcare, daycare assistance for working moms, single moms, and dads. Na may batas na tayo dyan, hindi pa rin na-i-implement ng maayos, di ba? Employment assistance, free technical education so that you can upgrade your skills. Is this really the best use of money in terms of addressing that problem of employment?
You were calling Akap something.
No, I was, what I want to discuss is, so di ba we have...
No, I
AKAP.
think in your page, you call it a hashtag New Pork
New
Barrel.
pork barrel. Yes, yes. The new
Okay.
pork barrel. I was including MAIP also. Because if you look at the data, and this is my whole frustration about the budget. Nga, what is the priority? What's the direction? No? And that's why I keep on talking about the budget. Kasi, so you have the erosion of 4Ps, more allocation on Akap. You have the erosion of PhilHealth, more allocation for MAIP. And this did not just happen in 2025, started 2023. Before 2023, more or less, PhilHealth is getting what it deserves to get, according to the law. Beginning 2023, they started reducing it. And that's why I also want to call for greater transparency from DBM, because how do we know if they're really giving what's due to PhilHealth? So we have to have this data showing how much do we really collect from all these sin taxes so we can compute and make sure PhilHealth spend it for us.
And we know how much PhilHealth actually gets from that 80%, 50% of that 80% from tobacco and sugar or sweetened drinks. I was hoping we have more time because apart from that, you also filed a cyber libel case against, just quickly, 30 seconds, SAS, no?
Yes.
Just brief, what is it about?
You know, this is not just about telling lies. This is about the malicious intent of spreading lies. And for me, there's an effect on that, especially if you're targeting people who try to correct this information done by groups of people. And this has been done systematically, not just to me, but to a lot of people. And for me, this is bullying.
What was said about you?
When I started talking about the confidential fund, and why
Of the
it's
Vice President.
of the Vice President, and why this is a corrupt activity. They started, Sasot and her friends started spreading this information that I'm connected with Speaker Romualdez, and I'm part of the distribution of money for Congress to investigate the piatos
Yeah.
and the confidential fund.
Billions nga daw, di ba?
Oh nga, I have billions. And my kids
oo.
are asking, Mom, why are you not
Nasaan
sharing?
bilyones,
Bilyones mo.
Mami?
But the idea there is really to attack me as a person, as an economist, and my credibility to talk about the budget and the confidential fund. And the thing is, the audience would believe this because I keep on getting direct messages, comments on my wall about my credibility, discussing the confidential fund when I'm paid by Speaker Romualdez. So you can see this agenda of attacking people who would try to explain the fake news and the disinformation that they're saying. And I think it's important to push back on that because there's social cost in terms of allowing wrong information to spread.
Cielo, thank you so much for your time. Let's have another discussion about inflation. Maraming salamat. Thank you for joining us, UP Diliman School of Economics Associate Professor Cielo Magno. And that's On Point. Join us again tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. here on BNC, the Billionario News Channel. I'm Pinky Webb. Thank you for watching.